Good morning, everyone, and welcome this morning to the third in a four-part series of webinars on how to plan and build an accessory dwelling unit or a backyard cottage or basement apartment. We're really pleased to have so many of you following along and attending multiple sessions. We've seen a lot of repeat attendees, repeat names, which is wonderful. I'm Janae Huber. I'm the co-founder of Olympians for People-Oriented Places, often called OPOP for ease. OPOP is a group of volunteers whose vision is a compact and diverse Olympia designed around people-oriented places. OPOP volunteer Virginia Sorrells had the idea for this event series and organized it with help from Nick Vroman, myself, and Phil Van Devanter. This event is generously sponsored by the South Sound section of the Washington chapter of the American Planning Association. These are our local planners in their professional organization, and they're doing such important and consequential work in our cities, county, and region. In addition to presenting at workshop 2 on financing, local bank Oli Fed also stepped in to support this series, and we're so grateful for their collaboration, which makes this event free to the public, but also available to a wider audience. Let's see. Forgive me as I navigate Zoom here. OPOP is interested in ADUs because they have the potential to provide more diverse housing in our community, and in particular in areas that are already developed and served by our shared infrastructure. In other words, we like infill housing. We don't like sprawl. That would be the other subtext of that. Today, we'll be covering planning and design. And our next session, which is listed on OPOP's website, which is opopnow.org, is going to cover construction. We've got a couple of really great panelists for that, Off-White from Brand X and Pete Kramiak from Bicycle Building, Home Building. And finally, I do have a couple of items of business before I introduce today's speakers. We're going to ask that you use the Q&A toolbar for questions, and we're going to go through as many as we can after the presentations. With the Q&A toolbar, feel free to put questions in as they come up for you. There'll also be a little bit of an opportunity after the presentations to add questions at that point. Our workshop today has nearly 100 attendees, and to ensure the maximum benefit, we also request that you keep your questions as general as possible, and even just think about how you can frame your question in a way where you get the answer that you need, but maybe it also has some benefit for other audience members. Your question's more likely to get asked. I think we've tried to answer as many as we can at previous workshops, but haven't been able to get to all of them. We'd also love to know how you heard about this event. It's helpful for us so that we can be more effective in getting the word out. And so we're going to go ahead and do a quick poll. You'll see that come across your screen here shortly. And while you're filling that out, I will just, I think I can move on to the next slide while you're filling that out. Here we go. Thank you so much for doing that. It really is, again, sort of helpful. Again, with volunteer time, we want to make sure that we're just being effective in how we're telling people about what we're up to. That is great. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And close that. And finally, this and all the sessions and relevant resource materials are posted on the OPOP website within a week. In fact, if you missed the first 3 workshops on rules and regulations and also on financing, in the rules and regulations covered Lacey and Olympia, cities of Lacey and Olympia, and then financing, you can find those on the OPOP website. So again, it'll take about a week to get this session up, but it will also be on the OPOP website. And you can see the website on your screen, opopnow.org. I'd now like to welcome our 2 panelists. Today, we're going to hear from Jason Talius. I've had the good fortune of working with Jason on a number of projects over the years, including the Eco Building Guild's Green Homes Tour. Jason is a Well Building Associated professional and is a project manager and planning coordinator for the Artisans Group, Architecture and Planning. And in those roles, Jason works on commercial and residential projects in everything from determining project feasibility through permitting, and coordinates the planning and development of every step in between. We are also welcoming Matt Hutchins. Interestingly, it was actually the Eco Building Guild that connected me with Matt, or rather, I should say, the Eco Building Guild connected me with Matt's reputation for strong, affordable housing advocacy and walkable neighborhoods in Seattle. So after hearing about Matt's work, I started stalking him on social media. Matt's very lively on Twitter and worth following if you use that particular platform. So I had the good fortune through Matt stalking to see some of the exceptional work that he and the firm he co-founded, Cast Architecture, was doing. So big thank you to Matt for his willingness to virtually visit the South Sound this morning. So thank you, Matt. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. I think Jason is kicking this off. Is that right? All right, go ahead, Jason.
Thank you, Janae. And thank you, Olympians for People-Oriented Places, for organizing the ADU 101 virtual workshops. We've all attended past OPOP events, and we're honored to participate in this one. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jason Talius, and as Janae said, I'm the project manager and planning coordinator for the international award-winning architecture and planning firm Artisans Group. And next slide, please. And the next one, please. Thank you. We are a 100% women-owned architecture and planning company located in Olympia, Washington. We design both residential and commercial spaces, and we are specialists in sustainable architecture, building science, and healthy building design.
Hi, yeah, I'm Matt Hutchins. I co-founded Cast Architecture, which is a 11-person firm in Seattle. We do about 2/3 of our work is residential. A lot of it is sustainable, and we really value building green and conserving resources. Next slide. One of the things that we really specialize in is kind of like creative urban living. So that ends up being sort of mini co-housing, triplexes, infill apartment buildings, bungalow courtyards, and of course, backyard cottages, which is the topic of our seminar today. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, this is, I guess, just a brief rundown of what Matt and I are going to be talking about today. And really briefly, we're kind of all assuming that everyone here at this point knows what ADUs are. I do want to speak briefly to some of the benefits of them from our perspective. We find that they help support flexible family living. ADUs can provide a private but close residence for an aging family member, or a great spot for family and friends to stay when they visit you. Sustainability through increased density. They can create a positive feedback loop in existing neighborhoods where the increased density inspires local businesses like our cafes, our restaurants, and general stores to set up shop within walking and biking distance, which then makes the neighborhood even more desirable and friendly to a non-car lifestyle. And on the financial planning side of things, as a potential revenue stream, ADUs can provide some long-term financial flexibility and increase your property value. On that topic, we absolutely recommend consulting a knowledgeable financial advisor to explore the benefits for your situation. And for more information about financing the construction of your ADU, we want to steer you to the previous OPOP presentation on that topic. Next slide. On to planning your ADU. That's why I'm here, so we get to talk about that. Next one, please. So budget and the problem of scale. We're going to jump right into the least fun part of the conversation, the projected budget and expected costs, which is why we put the most fun picture that we had here. But the picture does speak to this idea of scale. Unfortunately, just because an ADU can be much smaller than your house, it's probably not going to be the same percentage less to build. The overall cost should be lower unless you decide to make it the nicest building on your property. But the cost per square foot will be higher because the most expensive rooms to build, things that have water coming into them, right? Your kitchen, your bathroom, these now take up a greater percentage of the home's overall square feet. Next slide. In 2018, the Urban Land Institute found that the average cost to build a new ADU in Portland and Seattle was around $160,000. Of course, construction costs are variable, and we've absolutely seen a post-COVID rise in the cost of materials and labor. And really, all of this goes to say that an ADU is an investment, and if you want to control runaway construction costs, then thorough planning and having a real and ongoing conversation about your budget is a necessary part of it. Next slide. So now that we've addressed the budget, we're going to talk about life cycle. What do you want to use the ADU for? Is this going to be for your own use? Are you thinking about the ADU for downsizing out of your original home and into this ADU? Or maybe you're thinking about it for a friend or a family member, or possibly long-term rental income, or elephant in the room here, maybe you're thinking about short-term rental income through a service like VRBO or Vacasa, or maybe you'd like to explore a mix of these uses. From my perspective in planning, each of these uses does involve different considerations. If, for example, you're thinking about a guest house for visiting friends and family, then the durability of your interior materials may be a lower priority in your planning. But if the home is going to be lived in every day, you want to think about places like your kitchen and the daily wear and tear of that space. In the smaller space, your work surfaces are going to have a higher usage rate. So the ease of cleaning and the durability of your materials should get more attention in that. Next slide. Special considerations, like a reading dog. Maybe you're thinking about your ADU on the sustainability side, or indoor air quality, right? It's allergy season, so we're thinking about pollens and dust and things like that. Maybe you're thinking about the ADU for aging in place, or even making it a social space for gatherings. Maybe you want your ADU to incorporate views on your property, or you live in a noisy neighborhood, so you're concerned about acoustics and acoustic dampening. Or you really, really care about natural light and you want to make sure that the ADU is bathed in natural light, or helps support an outdoor-centric lifestyle. And so storage is important. Right, pets, this can go on and on, but because we all have unique preferences on these, and all of these considerations do impact how we think about planning for your ADU. So if, for example, accessibility is important, then we're giving extra consideration to the entrance, low and zero thresholds, wider doors within the ADU, unimpeded circulation and storage access. If sustainability is important, we can help you specify more sustainable and environmentally friendly materials, and apply evidence-based building science to design in energy efficiency to the building. But if the ADU is going to meet your goals on these fronts, then we need to know your priorities so that we can plan accordingly. Otherwise, we're leaving a lot to chance. Next slide. As an example of why we love building science and why planning is so crucial, Puget Sound Energy sent one of our clients this chart comparing her energy usage with her neighbors from September to August. From November to February, energy use peaks, right? It's winter, so we turn up the heat. Her home, which is represented by the bottom blue line in this chart, uses about 40% less energy than her energy efficient neighbors, which is the middle green line, and 75% less than an average of all of her neighbors, which is the top gray line. Keep in mind, this is not an ADU, this is for a full-sized house, but just to give you an idea of kind of comparison on this, or comparison analysis. From a sustainability standpoint, this is obviously great news. For long-range budget projections, her investment in energy efficiency is adding up to long-term savings. But from a planning perspective, where I'm at, this chart is self-reinforcing gold because it matches the predictive data that we had before the house was built. We precisely designed and oriented our home to reach this level of performance, but it only happened because it was so planned out ahead of time. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Site. This is where it's all going to happen. If you don't have a survey of your site, this is the first things first, then we strongly advise hiring a land surveyor. From the survey data, we're able to develop an accurate site plan, and every permitting jurisdiction we've worked with requires a site plan. Also, an accurate site plan is an indispensable part of maximizing your investment through planning. So let's talk about that. Here's an example site plan. The property lines are green, and in this instance, they create a tidy rectangle for us. We have the existing home surrounded by two driveways in dark gray, walkways also dark gray, and significant trees are represented by light gray circles. We'll say it's a two-story home with stunning views at the back of the house toward the trees. And for our ADU program, we're going to say that we want a detached accessory dwelling unit. We want it for aging in place. We want it to have a view, and we want it to create a shared outdoor living space with the main home while maintaining at least a little bit of privacy. Next slide. If we were to look at only the property lines here, we appear to have a lot of options for placing our ADU, but unfortunately, property lines are not equivalent to buildable area. The first OPOP virtual ADU workshop does a great job covering these limitations and is available to watch or listen to on the OPOP website. They spoke about property line setbacks, height, size, and impervious surface limits, which are all common restrictions that impact how, where, and what you can build, and vary from city to city and county to county, so you want to know what those are in advance. And in this imaginary one, let's see how they impact our choices on the next slide. Here we've added setbacks, represented by the red rectangle, and topographic lines that show how the existing house sits on top of some elevation. Those are all of our new gray lines throughout the drawing. Front and rear yard setbacks are 20 feet from the property line, while side yard setbacks are each 5 feet. The gray topographic lines represent 2-foot changes in elevation, so each line is either 2 feet higher or lower than the line next to it. And when you see a bunch of them crowded together like this, that's what's showing you that you have a steep slope. For this exercise, we're going to say that this slope meets the definition of a critical area for landslide hazard, and critical areas have their own setbacks or buffers. Next slide. In this imaginary jurisdiction, a steep slope requires a 50-foot buffer from the top of slope, which is now marked by these 2 new bright red lines. This is pretty common as a minimum, just so you know. Next slide. Between all of these setbacks, the available area for ADU is suddenly a lot more limited. And it's questionable whether a detached ADU would actually work in this situation. Fortunately, when we see this, we know that all is not lost. Often, when we're working with clients who have land impacted by critical areas, we end up reaching out to coordinate our efforts with relevant specialists. In this case, we would bring in a geotechnical engineer to visit the property, do some analysis of the site and soil conditions, research history of landslides, and for this site, next slide, it would be determined that with a properly engineered foundation, the actual buffer can be 25 feet from the top of slope instead of 50. The reason I'm including this in our exercise here is that a lot of properties around the Pacific Northwest are impacted by critical areas. And I want to assure you that it doesn't mean that you're necessarily out of luck. It may just require bringing in some additional help to find a true route forward. But back to our site. And with the restrictions now known, we can concentrate on finding these opportunities to match up with some of the project goals, which, if you remember, are detached ADU, aging in place, view, and creating a shared outdoor living area with at least a little privacy. Next slide. So, taking advantage of the existing driveway for drive-up accessibility, we situate the new ADU, which is our new blue rectangle here, at the end of the driveway. By slightly turning the ADU's orientation, we create a shared courtyard between the primary home and the ADU, and we take full advantage of the hillside view below. And we've made it so that neither home is staring directly into the other's windows, so we do have that little bit of privacy at least. And on to you, Matt.
Great, thanks. Once you've kind of have a handle on some of the basics of what you're going to be able to do, I think it's important to look at kind of 3 pathways for design, because there's a lot of different, there are a lot of architects, there are a lot of companies that are focusing on backyard cottages and DADUs. So I just wanted to touch on these 3 methods because they all have kind of pros and cons. That's kind of doing something that's prefab or turnkey, doing a stock plan or pre-approved plan, or doing custom design. Next slide. So if you're going to do something that, let's say in the last 10 years or so, there have been a bunch of companies that have created prefab options where there's a set design and they will build it offsite, deliver it to your site, and hand you the key. These are really, really compelling. You have kind of a limited risk and often a fixed price, so you kind of know what you're getting into. And if you've got a site that isn't constrained, like less constrained than the example that we just saw with the slopes, etc., it can be a really excellent option to be able to put something in it at generally a lower cost. Um, the difficulties are that you don't really get to control so much the aesthetics beyond picking and choosing which prefab company that you might be working with. This image that I'm showing you now is from a company called Adobo, or let's see, Abodu. They're out of California, and so they have a couple of models, and essentially they will supposedly. Once you sign a contract, deliver this within a month. So it's a pretty impressive operation. But in order to do that, there's a lot of scale that they have to build into the process in advance. So there's not very many prefab companies that are doing this successfully. But the other nice thing is then it's a single source of responsibility for you sign a contract with one company and they come out with this. Um, let's see, Artisans Group has a prefab, or next slide. They have a prefab passive house. Is it passive house?
It is.
All
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
that's great. Do you want to talk just a second about how this works?
Yeah, so this is a flexible prefab and sustainable ADU that we've developed. It can be built with either 1 or 2 bedrooms, have a garage or a carport, and is designed to be energy efficient. The exterior shell can be assembled in less than a week, and I think it's actually like 3 days is what they estimated at. But like what Matt was saying, aside from the interior design and exterior siding, you really can't change this design much without going into a more custom design process.
Yeah, so let's go to the next sort of layer here. Next slide. Is going with something that is a stock plan or something that's pre-approved. Many jurisdictions are moving towards having a kind of portfolio of pre-approved plans. In the old days, you could always buy a stock plan, online. There's plenty of outfits that will, have something in the can already. And in that case, the design is mostly mostly locked in. However, the construction you still have to figure out. Get a GC. You still have to get it. For the most part, if it's a stock plan, you need to get it permitted. You need to get it permitted for your jurisdiction. So even if you're buying something that is pre-approved or stock plan, it's not the end of you're not at the end of the process. You still need to tailor it to your site. Let's see. Go to the next slide, please. These are some of that last one, I should say, is a pre-approved plan that we have available through the city of Seattle, and then Artisans Group has some as
Yeah,
well.
I was going to say, so both Cast Architecture and Artisans Group were 2 of 10 firms chosen by the city of Seattle as part of their pre-approved ADU program. And exactly what Matt was saying as far as kind of your limitations on changing things, but you do have greater control over how it's built.
Mhm. I think there's another slide.
Yeah, and these are 4 ADUs that are also examples of pre-designed plans that we developed in partnership with the cities of Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater. This was to help residents create more housing options in existing neighborhoods. And these 3 cities are making these plans available to residents with legal lots for free. The 3 single-level designs all are aging in place friendly, have accessible design, and the 2-story plan is 800 square feet with or living space within less than 400 square foot footprint.
Great. Next slide. Okay, kind of the third pathway, after kind of a turnkey versus a pre-approved plan, is something that is a full custom design. And where this really comes into play is where you may have a very constrained site. You may have that that requires, in order to requires a lot of like custom fitting to get it to work into that site. It could also be that you just want to match the house. It's the principal residence. Maybe you want to contrast it. Maybe you want to do something for yourself that is, wild and crazy, and you're not going to find a custom or a prefab plan that captures, what you want to do with it. The great thing about this is you're really in control, and you can really, tailor the design to the site, to your program, to your schedule, to all those needs that you've kind of outlined in that sort of planning process that Jason talked about earlier. And you can, dial in the level of affordability, all the materials, et cetera. At this point, the architect becomes super important because they're kind of your guide through the whole process, through design, permitting, and usually construction. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But so it's kind of flip side. You're in a lot more. You have a lot more control, but you also have more risk. Because you're kind of starting from scratch. Next slide. So I'm going to go through some design tips that we end up using in our design process for every custom design. And you don't write these down. You'll have plenty of time. We'll go through them all. But these are themes that I find myself coming back to again and again and again when I'm working with a new client. So first tip here. Next slide. Leveraging the site to expand living space. Because we're often working on urban sites where there isn't a lot of room. It's really, really important to leverage the site. It's one of your most important assets, and the design of the cottage can expand into the site and borrow some of that space and feel much more open if it has walls of glass that orient towards parts of the garden. You really want to manage privacy. In this case, you can see this big patio in the foreground, and that was because this was a multi-generational site where the family lived in the main house, or I should say the kids lived in the main house with their family, and then the grandparents were built this in the backyard. And that big patio joins the two, connects the two houses. And so what you really have is in the summertime, all those doors open up and kids and grandparents are all just hanging out on the porch. That sort of commonality, borrowing the space from each other is a really, really important tactic when you're trying to design something for multi-generational living. If this were to be a rental, maybe that would be, you'd want to focus more on privacy, and maybe so the orientation of the openings don't line up with the principal residence. And so that's something to consider, because you can either have the inhabitants feel kind of on display in a fishbowl, or they can feel private and also have this expansion into the garden. Oftentimes what happens is we have the principal residence and the cottage are both oriented toward a common backyard, but they're not looking at each other. They're both looking at it at 90-degree angles. So next slide. The other thing that we end up doing a lot is having an open plan, but it's important to think about it as not everything is open. These cottages are very small, and so privacy becomes really, really important, like the location of bathrooms. But as much as you can, making the kitchen, dining, and living space all into one room, and then segregating all the spaces that need to be closed, bathrooms, bedrooms, etc., in either another wing or another half or another story, allows you to really leverage the space that you have and make it feel as big as possible. This is another great example of leveraging the site. In this case, we have the principal residence is behind where you can see the kitchen. So we're not looking at the original house at all. We're looking west out over the backyard. So let's see, next slide. Another thing that we always do is make sure that we minimize what architects will call circulation, which is just the space that is solely dedicated for getting from room to room. So it's just hallways, entryways, spaces where you can't put furniture that you can't use. So in this slide, this is our stock plan, our pre-approved plan for Seattle, the Cedar Cottage, but you can see that really it's only the space around the entry that is dedicated to circulation. That one little 5x7 area links the entryways to the bathroom, to the bedroom, and to the living space. Next slide. Here's another sort of plan for something that is a 2-story cottage, but you can see that we've left the living, dining, and kitchen area all sort of, contiguous, where you just kind of enter onto, one corner of it, and we try and limit the amount of circulation. If you have a staircase, the best plan for that staircase is to try and get it to land where it can, again, the landing upstairs or downstairs can connect to as many rooms as possible. Next slide. Now, storage. Even though the houses are small, it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to downsize all your stuff. So it's really important to come to like basically eke out every inch of storage that you can, but also to think of storage. It's as important as the kitchen. You really need to think about pantry space, clothes space, and all the other stuff. And in order to like kind of leverage that open plan feel, what we often do is have banks of storage. So let's just flip forward to the next slide here for a second. So this little cottage, we're looking at from the living room across the dining room into the kitchen, again using that open plan. You can see like we have double loaded cabinets on the below, upper cabinets, a pantry, and then there's a broom closet, and then there's a powder room, and then there's the stairway with the storage underneath that we saw on that last slide. And those two walls of this little cottage that are, it's 380 square feet on this floor. It's all storage, and storage for vacuum cleaners and albums and the turntable and kitchen, all that kind of stuff. But it is very, very compact, and we used every inch of that so that we can dedicate the rest of that space to the living. Yeah, the sort of final lesson, I think, is just understanding that building small is just kind of fundamentally different than building a big house. I mean, you have a lot of the same components, but I think there's the way that it lives is different. You have a lot more overlap. You have a lot less privacy, more kind of open plan, but also things like, like a mechanical system. You don't need much to be able to heat a cottage of the size. And if it's something like Passive House, you may need, a little, one cadet little heater or, a one radiator, and that's more than enough. And so you may not have mechanical, but you have all the plumbing aspects, as Jason mentioned. So you have, a full kitchen, even though you don't have a lot of square footage. So, there's certainly opportunities for smaller appliances, but they're kind of at a premium. So on a cost per square foot, it ends up being like seeming crazy expensive, but because it has all those components. But the sort of flip side is if you step back from it, when if you think about the special moments, like really high, like custom finishes or really cool tile or all those sort of things that maybe you wouldn't be able to afford if you had a big house, if you're trying to build a big house, you can totally splurge and have it not be a big hit in the budget. So like, on the photo on the right, we ended up having a finished birch plywood ceiling in this house, something that we would never really afford in another house, but since it's only 25 or like 200 square feet, right? We can pull it off. And then on the right side or on the left side, we have this bedroom is 7 feet by 10 feet. And the way that we really rationalize making that work is thinking differently about it, in that it really is this little nest. And we built in the queen bed and sort of coated it with warm wood, and then had that little, perfect sort of framed window on there, storage underneath, so that even though it is small, we're leveraging its smallness and making it feel like something that is really, really unique. Next slide.
Yeah, I'm really just mostly going to reiterate what Matt was saying here. Because we see all the same stuff. Everyone knows that a lack of storage in small space design is an issue. I mean, it's an issue for a lot of people in larger houses. And then you get to a small house, and if you're working with somebody who's downsizing, then it becomes a bigger issue. So in compact home design, we just absolutely, to reiterate what Matt is saying, you will not regret spending the extra time and energy seeking creative and attractive ways to add more storage. Also, following on what Matt was saying on incorporating the outdoors, you know, with the small space, your outdoor access, views, and living opportunities only get more important because otherwise you're trapped in that small space. So properly orienting the ADU and window placement can dramatically impact your feeling of spaciousness from inside by increasing your visual depth of field. So you don't want to be staring at a fence, for example, if at all possible. And frankly, the other side of that too is, as we're talking about budget, the outside can be the most budget-friendly room of the house when you bring it on the inside. And then the final overlooked and undervalued design opportunity that we see with these designs is just pure aesthetic enjoyment. You know, whatever it is that makes you sing when you look out there and see it, because this is probably going to be a really prominent part of your visual and spatial experience of your space. And it absolutely represents an investment in your property. So when possible, we recommend choices that will increase your long-term enjoyment, because future you is going to come back and thank you. You're muted, Matt.
Yes, there we go. I wanted to touch on construction just a little bit, and using an architect and how you know, pitching architect services here. You know, for the most part, you may not have ever built anything before, but architects will have done this hundreds of times, and so it's nice to be able to have an architect also be able to guide you through the process. And I certainly also, as a former design builder, a former contractor, I also value the design build process. But I think what's really important to do or to deal with any partner in construction is that you have to be able to build, have a really strong relationship of trust, because building anything is tough, and there are going to be a lot of tough days and dealing with the budget and stress and noise and dust and all that kind of stuff that comes with having construction in your backyard, you know, ripped up for, you know, for 6 months if you're doing something along the custom lines. And so so having somebody along the way that can help, you know, sort of smooth out the rough spots is really important, and an architect can do that. Also, since they're the ones that will have prepared the drawings and prepared the permit and dealt with the engineer, they can be really your advocate, both in making sure that the construction happens at the level of quality, but also that you get everything that you sort of, you know, wanted to, that you've paid for. You know, that the quality's there, the tile work is right, the, you know, seams line up, you know, there's no leaks, that sort of thing, and that's really important. And then, yeah, the final kind of note is that despite, you know, in every construction project, there are always questions. There are always things that need to be resolved, and having, you know, having a building expert on your team, you know, on your side really can help streamline the construction process incredibly. So, you know, because, you know, if a contractor comes to you and asks you like, hey, what do I do with this? You're not going to necessarily know, you know, how it may impact the building's performance, or is it going to cause a leak, or how is it going to be durable, or how, you know, the full kind of range of issues that architects deal with, you know, in every one of those design decisions. So they can really help streamline that process, which ultimately, you know, pays you back in terms of getting better product and also at, you know, kind of like the best value. So I think that was all that I wanted to touch on with construction. Jason, do you have anything that you wanted to hit on?
I think that was great, Matt.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're onto the Q&A. Do you guys want to tee it up?
Yeah, thank you so much. We're getting some really great questions here. Thanks so much for your presentation. We're going to keep these slides up just in case people have specific questions about specific projects. First of all, I'm going to start with, let's see, a very general question. What's the difference between an attached dwelling unit and a detached dwelling unit?
I think just that. So the attached dwelling unit, it can either be an existing part of your house that's already there that you're then separating and turning it into its own unique dwelling unit. Or it can be an addition onto your house. The detached is separate, and usually by a minimum of like 5 to 10 feet. That's something that you need to check in with your local jurisdiction on.
Mhm. So everything you've been showing us today, those are all detached ADUs, just so everybody knows. It's the same as a backyard cottage. So it's not something you're building in your basement or directly attached to your existing dwelling. Great, thanks. We have a couple of questions about square footage. If you're building a structure with 2 levels, so the main level and then a sleeping loft, how would the square footage on that be calculated for permitting purposes?
I can, let's see. It's going to depend on the jurisdiction because every place has got different rules for, sizes and also how they calculate it. In Seattle, it's going to be, based on floor area of space over 7 feet high. And so you get a bump for the, for space under eaves. It doesn't count, but it counts towards other things. So it counts towards, floor area ratio, but not unit size. So it's really important to kind of pin that down at the very beginning, because like in Seattle, for example, that loft that you can't stand up in, it wouldn't count towards the unit size, which is capped at 1,000 square feet, but it would count towards floor area ratio, the amount of square footage on the site as a whole. And so you have to balance both of them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, and regarding questions like that, since they are so specific to the municipality, it really is worthwhile to visit the website of whatever municipality you're thinking of building in first to find out what their general rules are. We had a question about where to get the plans for the pre-approved ADUs. If you want links to the people to contact, you can go to our website, opopnow.org, if I got that right, to look for contact information for the municipalities there, for Lacey, Tumwater, and Olympia.
And I would just build on that to say that the pre-approved plans are only available to people who are building in that jurisdiction. So you actually have to, before you can get those plans, you can see pictures of the different designs, but before you actually can access the plans, you would have to provide evidence to your local planning department that you are a resident or that you own a property in that jurisdiction.
Right.
So they're not just things that anybody can grab and be able to, take the Seattle pre-approved plans and use them in Olympia. They may not meet the Olympia rules and regulations. So, but Lacey, Tumwater, and Olympia did coordinate on their plans so that the designs that Artisans Group did for pre-approved plans meet the rules for the general rules for all 3 of those jurisdictions. Although again, of course, there's site considerations depending on what your lot size is and all of that. But the plans themselves meet the basic rules and regulations for Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater.
Great, thank you. Thanks for explaining, Janae. Here's a question that is probably inspired by those lovely photos of the patio spaces that you showed. Is an outdoor overhanging roof covering a poured patio counted as part of square footage?
I'm going to say, again, that's going to depend on the jurisdiction. In Seattle, if you park on it, it counts towards floor area ratio, but not unit size. If you don't park on it, then it doesn't. Okay.
That's wild. Anything to add to that, Jason? Or what?
No, again, that's something that you do absolutely want to check out in the planning phase of this. And first thing, what is your jurisdiction's regulation on that? Typically, it doesn't in most of the jurisdictions we worked with, but there's no guarantee that that's going to be the same from one boundary line to the next.
Mm-hmm. Great. We have a question that sounds very project specific, but I'm going to throw it out there. And it may be a question that's better suited to our next panelists who are going to talk about conversion versus new construction. But the question is, what types of design considerations do you encounter when converting an existing structure, say a garage or a carport? How does the process differ from a new build? Is it ever better to tear down and start new? That's very broad, but do you have any insights into that question?
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit, and then Matt, you can follow if that works. So some of the things that we see from an engineering perspective, if you're working with a garage pad, the pad is often not engineered to support living space. And so just from a practical standpoint, that can be something that the jurisdiction is looking at and working with an engineer to shore up things so that you can have a permittable living or habitable residence. And then, a lot of the same things in terms of your views, your privacy, using existing plumbing versus bringing in new. All of those will come into your considerations on that front.
Great.
Yeah, I would add to that you also have to consider fire separation between structures. And so oftentimes we will have an old garage that is right on the property line, but that's a non-conforming condition. So you actually have to go back and retrofit the wall from the outside, which means tearing the siding off and putting up, special kind of, gypsum board. And, by the time you do a lot of these things, maybe, do something with the drainage and insulation and fire separation. And at some point, there's very little left of the original carport, and so or garage. And so we found that it's been tough, and it's not the only place where it really makes sense is if it's in a location that is really unique and irreplaceable. Like oftentimes we can't build a second story on an existing garage because it's in a setback or in a wetland or something like that. So, or if it's surrounded by dense exceptional trees. And so so for the most part, it may not make financial sense, but it may be the best choice from a design perspective.
Great. Yeah, good answer. Thank you. We had a question about the need to be tied into sewer or composting or septic options. Again, I'd encourage you to contact your municipality to talk to them about the particular rules for that location. Here's a question that I was interested in. When's the best time to start working with an architect? And I think the scenario that this questioner had in mind was starting with raw land, subdividing the property. So this sounds like a very big picture kind of project. So there's kind of that end of the scale, but also with the pre-approved plans. When should people start thinking about bringing in architectural advice, or where in the process do you guys come in?
Jason, you want to lead that off since you talked about planning?
Yeah, sure. Kind of the earlier the better is our perspective on the matter. If only so that you can bounce ideas off of us and we can, provide you with what we've learned along the way. On the feasibility side, if you're looking at raw land, then it absolutely helps to have someone in your corner who knows which questions to ask, or basically knows what you don't already know about the parcel, what could get in your way in the future. And then when it comes to kind of the existing plan sets, oftentimes with the cities, if you're reaching out in Seattle or Olympia, Lacey, Tumwater, the cities will be able to talk with you directly about whether or not your lot is appropriate. And then you still need some site considerations to develop your site plan with that plan set. And so after you decide whether or not you want to move forward, that's kind of the best time to reach out.
And I would just add that we often help clients before they've even purchased the land in looking at sort of the challenges and opportunities of individual parcels, because oftentimes it might be a go no go kind of a decision. Can we do this? And we might be able to say yes or no. No, move on to the next one because this one won't work for the goals that you have. So I think that you shouldn't be afraid to call an architect early and just get like a per hour sort of consultation, if because it's a huge investment.
Mm-hmm. Good. We have another question about the considerations when comparing new detached builds versus conversions. It is really so project specific. It's a tough question to answer, but I would really encourage you to come to our next presentation on April 10th, when we'll have people who are involved in exactly those kinds of projects, giving more detail on those.
They love to talk about price per square foot. So.
And they're lovely people, so
Yeah.
you should definitely come back and experience that presentation.
I think if I had an insight in the, in remodeling versus building new, it's that that they cost the same amount of money ultimately, and so if you're retrofitting, retrofitting a garage or a basement, you're spending money on different stuff, and you're spending money to kind of undo what's done, as opposed to moving forward fresh. And so so I think that people tend to think that, oh well, the remodel is going to be less money, but then not anticipate the things that are going to be more, like adding an addition. You end up re-roofing the whole house or repainting the whole house, and those things are absolutely don't conform to like a cost per square foot sort of thought about how much budget it's going to take.
Mhm.
Yeah, and just to support what Matt was saying there too, when we're looking at old garages, oftentimes those things are stick frame 2x4s, and so when you're thinking about whether or not that's going to perform or drag down the performance of your whole house, it can have some pretty detrimental effects if you're trying to work with the existing structure.
Right. In Olympia, question for Olympia, are there any prefab options that are pre-approved?
No, not that I know of.
Short answer, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say the plans that are pre-approved could be prefabbed if either we can reach out to a prefabricator, or it's something that the person who wants to build it can do directly, and see if a prefabricator would be willing to take it on. We are working at kind of developing those relationships.
And I know that the city of Olympia is looking into prefab options. I don't know where it is in their project pipeline, but it's something that they are looking into to kind of accelerate the use of ADUs in the city. We've got about 5 minutes left. One last question. Root cellars, food storage under the house. Have you seen much of this? And are these the types of things that you can build into pre-approved designs?
I'd say no, not into a pre-approved design. That's more of a custom design. Oftentimes we don't. Basements are hard to make pencil, so we don't do as many basement or ADUs that have basements, just because it's a lot of, again, like per square foot concrete is quite expensive and excavation is really expensive, and so going down tends to be a losing proposition. I mean, but there's lots of, you could do something like having, many Japanese houses have, for example, floor panels that pop up, and that's where the storage goes, because there's extra floor area, but not extra site area. So you could imagine doing something like that, but I think it would be highly custom.
Yes, thank you. Do we have time for one more question, Janae? I'm going to assume.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I was slow to get my mute.
That's fine. So getting back to the prefab plans, why does somebody need an architect if they're getting the pre-approved plans from the city? What is the role of an architect if the house is already designed? Where exactly do you come in?
Right, the site planning primarily. So if they're not making any changes to a pre-approved plan, then they still need a site plan that incorporates the existing structure, setbacks, all of that, if there are critical areas on the site, and where to put the house. All of the other parts of the design in the pre-approved plans are taken care of. And then if they want to make any changes, architects are great resource for making changes to the pre-approved plans as well.
So you would help with things like figuring out how the utilities within the house line up, say, with the sewer lines and with the electrical lines and so forth?
Yeah, typically we would be working with a plumbing contractor or somebody on the utility side to make sure that that gets lined up. But yes, that is part of the site planning.
Good. Well, that's all the questions we have for today. Janae, do you want to take it from here?
I will. Yes. Thank you so much. Wow. I feel like my brain is again, as with all of them, actually, I feel like my brain is now processing a whole bunch of new kind of questions and exciting possibilities. It's also just really wonderful to see some of these. They're such inspiring designs, and I love the creative, compact uses of space. So thank you to our panelists today for sharing your Saturday with us and all of your expertise that comes from designing for small spaces. And I really want to underscore something that Matt said about, designing for small spaces is different. And the reason that we selected these two architecture firms to present is that they really, both of them have, as part of their portfolios, if you take a look at either of their websites, they have done work on ADUs, which is not something that every architecture firm has necessarily done. So I think, keeping an eye out for folks that have experience designing for small spaces is important if you are thinking about engaging an architect for those services. And there's also a couple of great resources that Matt pointed us to from the American Institute of Architects in Seattle, a bunch of just images of ADUs that could inspire you and get you excited about this, and just even prompt your own creativity as you're thinking through the issues. So really take a look at that section. But again, these guys are not just speaking as architects, but they're speaking as architects who have worked on this kind of project. And in Jason's case, as a planner who's helped facilitate some of these, seeing them through the process. So thank you both for bringing your expertise today. And thank you to our attendees for being here today as well. We hope you'll register for our final workshop, which is again on construction of your ADU. And this will help you with, what are those conversations? At what point are you going to bring in your contractor to do this work? And I think that there's a perfect flow from this presentation to that one. Again, keep an eye out on the OPOP website for this video to be posted if you have things you want to go back and reference and share it with your friends, along with some of the other resources that we've pulled together. There were some good questions about, where do I see the pre-approved plans? And Lacey's website is the key. They have pictures of all of them, just pretty basic design pictures, but they still have images of all of them. That's a quick, easy way to see all of them together at once. And you can also sign up on the OPOP website for our email list if you want to keep up with our activities. We do a mix of advocacy work and also educational work, things that are about helping our city be a more compact city. So thank you for spending your Saturday with us. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and looking at the weather, looks like a get outside kind of day. So take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for coming out.